I had stood beneath the towering dome of Helios Citadel many times, yet it never stopped making me feel insignificant. The station was the political heart of the Star Union, a city-sized structure where hundreds of civilizations gathered to decide the fate of the galaxy. Every corridor carried echoes of ancient empires, and every chamber reminded humanity how young we truly were. We had joined the Union only 18 years earlier, earning a seat near the bottom of the Senate, not as an insult, but because influence was measured in centuries, not ambition. Around me, delegates from civilizations older than human history spoke with quiet confidence, their words shaping the future of entire sectors. Few even glanced toward Earth's platform. We were the newcomers, observers expected to learn rather than lead. As the opening chime echoed through the vast chamber and the emergency session began, I had no idea that before the day ended, a single sentence from me would change how the galaxy would remember humanity forever. Speaker Telleran rose from the central dais, his crystalline form glowing beneath the chamber lights. The conversations faded instantly. Even civilizations that had spent millennia competing with one another respected the authority of the Senate Speaker. Above him, a massive holographic projection expanded until it filled the center of the chamber. A peaceful cluster of emerald worlds appeared, surrounded by graceful trade routes and scientific stations. Then the image changed. Red tactical symbols spread across the borders like a growing infection. Thousands of Krag Dominion warships were assembling in precise formations, supported by carriers, supply fleets, orbital siege platforms, and heavy assault groups. This was not a border dispute or another political demonstration. It was an invasion already in motion. The Lyren ambassador slowly stepped onto the speaking platform. Ambassador Saren looked exhausted, but he refused to let despair show on his elegant face. His people were known throughout the Union for their music, medicine, and diplomacy. They had never believed that survival depended on overwhelming military power. Looking around the chamber, he spoke with quiet dignity. My government invokes Article 12 of the Star Union Charter. We formally request immediate military assistance against the Krag Dominion. No one interrupted him. Our intelligence confirms that their fleets will enter Lyren territory within 72 standard hours. We do not ask others to fight our battles without reason. We ask because without help, our civilization will cease to exist. His words echoed through the enormous hall before disappearing into complete silence. I studied the faces surrounding me. Ancient senators exchanged thoughtful glances while military advisors quietly reviewed tactical projections. None of them doubted the Lyren were telling the truth. The evidence floated above us for everyone to see. Yet I also understood the fear hidden behind their calm expressions. Challenging the Krag Dominion meant risking a galactic war that could consume entire sectors. One by one, delegates requested permission to speak. Each began with sympathy. Each praised the Lyren, and each prepared to explain why sending help was impossible. I remained silent, listening carefully, unaware that every argument brought the Senate one step closer to a decision that would force me to stand. The first senator to speak represented the Arkan Collective, a civilization whose fleets had guarded the eastern sectors for nearly 3,000 years. His voice carried neither arrogance nor cruelty, only calculation. The Lyren deserve our compassion, he said, but committing our navy would leave billions of our own citizens exposed. We cannot exchange one tragedy for another. Murmurs of agreement followed. Another delegate rose, then another. Every speech sounded reasonable. Every argument relied on logic, probabilities, and political necessity. None questioned the suffering that awaited the Lyren. They questioned only whether saving them justified the cost. From my seat I watched Ambassador Saren without drawing attention to myself. He listened respectfully, thanking each senator for speaking, even when their words quietly sealed the fate of his people. There was no anger in his expression anymore, only disappointment. I wondered how many promises the Star Union had made when the Lyren first joined. Promises of mutual defense, promises that no member would ever stand alone. Those promises now seemed painfully distant beneath the polished marble and crystal of the Senate chamber. The tactical display rotated slowly above us, highlighting the advancing Krag formations. New intelligence appeared every few minutes. Additional carrier groups, fresh troop transports, long-range artillery platforms. The invasion fleet continued growing while we debated procedure. Time was becoming another weapon, and the Krag were using it well. Still, nobody proposed intervention. Some suggested sanctions after the invasion. Others recommended humanitarian aid once the fighting ended. One senator even proposed opening refugee corridors, as though discussing evacuation before a single battle had begun were somehow a compassionate compromise. I clenched my hands beneath the desk until my knuckles turned white. Earth's platform remained silent. No one asked for humanity's opinion. No one expected it. To nearly every civilization in that chamber, we were still students learning the realities of galactic politics. They assumed we would eventually understand that difficult choices required abandoning impossible causes. As the final speaker returned to his seat, Speaker Lyren announced that the Senate would now proceed to the official vote. The chamber became so quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat. One by one, the voting lights illuminated across the Senate chamber. Green for intervention, amber for abstention, red for refusal. From my seat, I watched the ancient civilizations make their choices with calm precision. Red after red appeared across the great spiral of platforms until the chamber glowed with the color of surrender disguised as reason. A handful of delegates abstained. Only a few supported military action. It was nowhere near enough. The result became undeniable long before Speaker Lyren officially announced it. The motion to authorize Union military intervention has failed. His voice echoed through the vast hall without emotion, yet every word struck like a hammer. Around the chamber, senators quietly organized their notes, already preparing to move on to the next item of business. To many of them, this had been a difficult but necessary decision. To the Lyren, it was a death sentence delivered with perfect parliamentary procedure. Ambassador Saren lowered his head. He neither protested nor pleaded. After exhausting every diplomatic avenue available to him, he accepted the verdict with heartbreaking dignity. Watching him stand alone before hundreds of representatives, I felt something inside me harden. Earth had entered the Union believing its charter meant exactly what it said. Today I had watched those ideals dissolve beneath calculations of acceptable loss. No one looked toward the human delegation. Why would they? Humanity possessed neither the political influence nor the military prestige to challenge the will of the Senate. Our fleet was small compared with the ancient powers, our history brief, our voice easily overlooked. We were expected to observe, learn, and eventually accept that survival sometimes demanded abandoning those who could not defend themselves. I slowly placed both hands on the polished surface of my desk. My heartbeat became strangely calm. The noise of the chamber faded until I heard only the quiet rhythm of my own breathing. There was nothing left to debate. If I remained seated, billions would die while history recorded that the Star Union had followed proper procedure. I pushed back my chair. The sound was soft, yet in the sudden silence that followed, it seemed loud enough for the entire galaxy to hear. I rose without haste. The quiet scrape of my chair against the polished floor echoed through the Senate chamber, drawing hundreds of curious eyes toward the lowest diplomatic tier. Conversations stopped. Even the delegates already preparing to leave turned back toward the center of the hall. For a brief moment, every ancient civilization in the Star Union seemed surprised that the youngest member intended to speak after the vote had already been decided. Speaker Lyren regarded me with calm curiosity. The representative from Earth has requested the floor. No objection came. No one considered my words important enough to oppose. I walked toward the central platform, feeling neither anger nor fear. Years of diplomatic training had taught me that emotion clouded judgment. If I was about to challenge the greatest political institution in the galaxy, I would do so with a clear mind and a steady voice. The holographic image of the Lyren worlds still floated above the chamber. Around it, The crimson symbols of the Krag invasion fleet continued multiplying as fresh intelligence streamed into the Senate network. Every passing minute brought more enemy ships closer to innocent planets. I stopped beneath the projection and slowly looked around the chamber. Hundreds of faces watched me. Some curious, some amused, some already bored. To most of them, I was simply the ambassador of a young civilization that had mistaken idealism for influence. I folded my hands behind my back. If the Senate has decided to abandon them, the words carried farther than I expected. No one interrupted. No one moved. I drew one slow breath before finishing the sentence. Then know this. The silence became absolute. They are not alone anymore. I said nothing else. The declaration needed no explanation. For several heartbeats, nobody reacted. Confusion spread across the chamber as delegates searched one another's faces, wondering whether they had misunderstood what I had just promised. Then whispers began rising through the enormous hall, spreading outward like ripples across still water. I remained standing beneath the stars of the Lyren cluster, waiting calmly while the impossible settled into every mind present. For several long seconds, no one spoke. The silence hanging over the Senate chamber felt heavier than any argument that had filled it moments before. Hundreds of delegates stared at me as though they had expected a joke to follow. None came. My words remained suspended beneath the holographic image of the Lyren worlds, simple and absolute. They were not alone anymore. Then the chamber erupted. Voices overlapped in every direction. Translators struggled to keep pace as senators questioned one another, demanding clarification before turning their attention back toward me. Some leaned forward with genuine disbelief, while others exchanged amused glances that barely concealed their contempt. To them, my declaration sounded less like policy and more like youthful defiance. Ambassador Kareth of the Valoran Assembly was the first to regain enough composure to speak. "Representative Mitchell," he said, his tone measured but unmistakably skeptical, "the Krag Dominion commands one of the largest military forces in known space. Their fleets have defeated powers far older and stronger than your own. Surely you do not intend to imply that humanity will oppose them alone." I stated exactly what I intended, I answered calmly. A ripple of uneasy laughter spread across the upper tiers. Another senator rose before Kareth could reply. "The human ambassador mistakes compassion for capability," she declared. "Noble intentions cannot stop orbital bombardments. Courage does not replace warships." Several delegates nodded in agreement. Others openly smiled. From where they sat, their conclusion was perfectly reasonable. Humanity possessed a modest fleet, limited political influence, and less than 2 decades of membership in the Union. Nothing in the official records suggested we had the strength to challenge an empire like the Krag Dominion. They believed they knew everything about us. They had never thought to ask what humanity prepared for when no one was watching. I met their doubtful expressions without the slightest trace of anger. Sometimes the truth sounded impossible until it arrived at your doorstep. Soon enough, the entire galaxy would discover that impossible and impossible to believe were two very different things. I offered no further explanation. There was nothing I could say that would convince them. Words meant little inside the Senate. Influence was measured by fleets, history, and victories, and humanity possessed none of those in quantities that impressed the ancient civilizations surrounding me. If I continued arguing, I would only reinforce every assumption they already held about us. So I simply inclined my head toward Speaker Telleran, turned, and began walking back to Earth's platform. The laughter followed me. It was not cruel, only dismissive. Several senators shook their heads as though watching an inexperienced diplomat learn an unavoidable lesson. Others whispered that humans were emotional by nature, too young to understand that noble intentions often died beneath the weight of military reality. One delegate remarked loudly enough for half the chamber to hear that idealism had always been the first casualty of interstellar politics. I ignored every word. Behind me, Ambassador Saren remained standing beside the central platform. As I passed, our eyes met for only a moment. He did not smile. He did not thank me. There was only quiet disbelief, mixed with the smallest spark of hope I had seen on his face since the session began. He understood as well as I did that promises carried consequences. If Earth failed to keep this one, 2 civilizations would fall instead of 1. When I reached my seat, a discreet light blinked on my personal console. An encrypted communication request waited silently beneath the display. Its origin identifier contained no text, only the highest security classification available to the Earth Diplomatic Corps. The transmission had arrived less than 30 seconds after I had spoken. No one else noticed. Around me, the Senate resumed its routine. Committees formed. Reports were archived. The Lyren crisis was already becoming another political record stored inside the Union's endless databases. I accepted the transmission without changing my expression. The message contained only 4 words. Authority confirmed. Proceed immediately. I closed the display. For the first time that day, I allowed myself the faintest breath of relief. Earth had heard me, and somewhere far beyond the walls of Helios Citadel, humanity was already moving. Far from Helios Citadel, beyond the crowded trade lanes and the watchful eyes of the Star Union, Earth orbited its sun in complete silence. Nothing about the planet suggested that history had just changed. Civilian transports followed their schedules. Orbital elevators carried freight toward waiting stations. Children walked to school beneath clear skies, unaware that an entire civilization now depended upon a promise spoken light years away. High above the planet, hidden within Liberty Command, Admiral Jack Turner stood before a wall-sized tactical display. His headquarters had no windows. It needed none. Every sensor, fleet position, and communication in human space flowed through the chamber in real time. Officers worked quietly at their stations, speaking only when necessary. There was no panic, no rushing footsteps, no raised voices. A secure channel chimed. The room fell completely still. Turner opened the transmission without hesitation. My recorded statement echoed through the command center. If the Senate has decided to abandon them, then know this. They are not alone anymore. The Admiral listened until the recording ended. No one asked whether my promise had been authorized. No one questioned whether humanity possessed the strength to honor it. Those decisions had been made years earlier. Turner folded his hands behind his back and studied the expanding tactical projection of Lyren space. Red icons marked the Krag invasion fleet. Blue icons identified civilian population centers. Every possible evacuation route appeared automatically across the display, calculated long before the current crisis had existed. Finally, he spoke. Activate Operation Guardian Promise. The words were calm, almost quiet, yet throughout human space they triggered a chain of events prepared in absolute secrecy. Hidden naval facilities unlocked sealed hangars. Quantum reactors awakened beneath mountains and oceans. Deep space shipyards suspended civilian construction and redirected power toward classified berths that officially did not exist. Across Earth and its colonies, encrypted orders reached commanders, engineers, medical crews, logistics specialists, rescue organizations, and thousands of civilian volunteers. No celebrations followed. No speeches were given. Humanity simply began doing what it had quietly prepared to do for years. Within minutes, encrypted acknowledgments returned from every corner of human-controlled space. Fleet commanders confirmed readiness without asking why. Shipyard directors halted commercial production and redirected entire assembly lines toward military support vessels. Civilian cargo captains accepted emergency requisition orders before the official notices even reached them. The response unfolded with such precision that an outside observer might have believed humanity had rehearsed this exact crisis countless times before. In many ways, we had. Years earlier, long before joining the Star Union, Earth's leaders had reached an uncomfortable conclusion. History had taught us that alliances could fail, treaties could be ignored, and politics often moved too slowly to save innocent lives. If humanity ever became part of a larger galactic community, there would come a day when debate lasted longer than compassion. We had quietly decided that when that day arrived, we would never again be forced to ask permission to rescue those abandoned by others. That decision became Operation Guardian Promise. Officially, the program never existed. Public budgets never mentioned it. Foreign observers never discovered it. Hidden beneath civilian infrastructure, disguised as research facilities and commercial shipyards, humanity constructed an entirely separate emergency response network. It was not designed for conquest or occupation. Every vessel, every supply depot, every command center served a single purpose: reaching threatened civilizations before extinction became inevitable. Its greatest secret was the quantum gate system. Unlike conventional faster-than-light travel, which required predictable routes and lengthy transit times, quantum gates folded space between carefully prepared anchor points. The technology remained dangerously experimental and enormously expensive. Building even one gate required years of work and resources that could have funded entire planetary economies. Humanity built dozens, scattered across uncharted systems, hidden inside rogue asteroids and dark nebulae. Those silent gateways waited without transmitting a single detectable signal. Most had remained dormant since their completion. Now, one after another, they awakened. Across distant sectors, ancient machinery began drawing power for the first time in years. Invisible corridors through space slowly opened, linking Earth to regions the rest of the galaxy believed required weeks to reach. Humanity had never prepared for war. Humanity had prepared to arrive before it was too late. 3 hours after Admiral Turner issued the order, the first quantum gate awakened beyond the outer boundary of Lyren space. No alarms detected it. No long-range sensors reported unusual energy signatures. The corridor simply appeared where empty vacuum had existed moments before, folding impossible distances into a single silent passage. Then the first human ships emerged. There were no triumphant broadcasts, no battle formations designed to intimidate. Instead, hospital vessels arrived first, escorted by heavily armored defense cruisers whose only purpose was to shield them. Behind them followed evacuation carriers, engineering platforms, logistics ships, fuel tenders, and mobile command stations. Warships remained on the perimeter, forming an expanding defensive screen while civilian crews immediately began preparing rescue operations. On the surface of Lyren Prime, emergency channels suddenly interrupted every broadcast. A calm human voice filled every frequency. "This is the United Earth Defense Command. The Galactic Senate has declined military intervention. Humanity has accepted responsibility for civilian protection. All evacuation routes will remain open. Follow beacon instructions. You are not alone." Across the planet, confusion quickly gave way to stunned silence. No one had expected anyone to come. Orbiting Krag reconnaissance vessels immediately transmitted contact reports to their invasion fleet. Initial assessments dismissed the arrivals as a symbolic humanitarian mission incapable of changing the campaign. Human numbers appeared limited compared to the overwhelming Krag armada advancing through neighboring sectors. The Krag Supreme Marshal reached the same conclusion. "Ignore them," he ordered. "Complete planetary occupation. Civilian transports are irrelevant." The command spread throughout the Dominion without objection. It would become the greatest strategic mistake of the entire war. Inside Liberty Command, Admiral Turner watched the tactical display without visible emotion. More quantum gates continued opening across surrounding systems. New blue markers entered the battlefield every minute. None headed toward the enemy. Everyone moved first to protect the innocent. Only after the evacuation corridors were secured would humanity begin fighting. That sequence had never been negotiable. From the bridge of the UES Resolute, I watched the tactical display fill with red symbols. The Krag fleets continued advancing exactly as our analysts had predicted years before. Their doctrine favored overwhelming force, relentless momentum, and absolute confidence that no opponent would sacrifice military advantage to protect civilians first. They believed our evacuation effort revealed weakness. In reality, it revealed our priorities. "Convoy 1 has cleared the gravity well," an officer reported. "Maintain escort. Convoy 2 is loading. Continue." Every order was delivered in the same calm tone. No one rushed. No one celebrated. Around us, thousands of Lyren civilians crossed into protected corridors while our cruisers absorbed the first probing attacks without returning significant fire. The Krag mistook restraint for hesitation. Their vanguard surged forward, attempting to cut the evacuation lanes before more refugees could escape. That was the moment Admiral Turner had anticipated from the beginning. Authorization received, the operations chief announced. Execute barrier protocol. The response was immediate. Human destroyers accelerated with astonishing precision, abandoning traditional battle lines. Instead of charging toward the enemy flagship, they struck fuel carriers, communications relays, ammunition tenders, and command drones. Entire sections of the Krag advance slowed as logistics collapsed beneath carefully coordinated attacks. Not a single shot was wasted on targets that could be bypassed. Within 20 minutes, 3 invasion groups had lost contact with one another. Within 40, supply shortages began spreading through fleets that had expected an effortless occupation. Confusion replaced certainty. Krag commanders demanded explanations that no one could provide. Every simulation they possessed assumed an enemy would seek glorious victories against powerful warships. Humanity ignored the warships whenever possible, dismantling the machinery that allowed them to fight instead. Watching from Helios Citadel, the Senate received live reports with growing disbelief. The humans were not winning through superior firepower. They were quietly removing every advantage the Dominion believed impossible to lose. For the first time since the invasion began, the Krag offensive stopped moving forward. And every additional minute meant thousands more Lyren reached safety. The first reports reached Helios Citadel before the battle itself had fully unfolded. Senators expected casualty lists and desperate requests for reinforcement. Instead, every transmission described the same impossible pattern. Human evacuation corridors remained intact. Krag assaults continued to fail. Entire invasion groups were becoming isolated without understanding how they had been separated. The war was no longer following any doctrine preserved within the archives of the Star Union. Speaker Telleran ordered every available observation platform focused on Lyren space. The chamber watched in silence. No heroic charges appeared across the tactical displays. Human formations advanced only when civilians had safely withdrawn beyond the combat zone. Medical ships never left their assigned positions. Engineering vessels rebuilt damaged infrastructure while fighting still continued only a few thousand kilometers away. Every movement suggested preparation measured in decades rather than days. Then something unexpected happened. The Asteri Republic broke formation. Without requesting permission from the Senate, 3 humanitarian flotillas entered the evacuation corridor under human escort. Moments later, the Valoran Assembly dispatched hospital ships. The Norathi protectorates followed with food convoys and emergency shelters. One after another, governments that had voted against intervention quietly ignored their own decision. No speeches announced the change. No formal declaration reversed the Senate's ruling. Individual captains simply crossed the boundary into Lyren space because someone else had already proven it could be done. Watching from my station, I realized humanity had accomplished something no diplomatic negotiation ever had. Courage had become contagious. The Krag Supreme Marshal received increasingly alarming updates. Every hour brought new civilian rescues, additional foreign relief fleets, and further disruptions to Dominion supply lines. What had begun as an isolated human operation was becoming a multinational effort impossible to intimidate. For the first time in the campaign, the Dominion abandoned confidence. They requested strategic reassessment. Admiral Turner studied the latest intelligence for only a few seconds before issuing his next order. Expand the corridor. No celebration followed. There was still too much work left to finish before anyone could claim victory. The order to expand the corridor marked the beginning of the end. Human fleets advanced only as far as necessary to protect the evacuation routes, yet every kilometer they secured became impossible for the Krag Dominion to reclaim. Their logistics network had collapsed beyond recovery. Fuel reserves dwindled. Ammunition convoys vanished beneath relentless precision strikes. Entire formations drifted powerless, surrounded not by overwhelming firepower but by the consequences of planning that had assumed supplies would never fail. The Supreme Marshal finally authorized a full assault against the human command ships. It came too late. The attacking fleets found nothing resembling a traditional headquarters. Human command functions had been dispersed across dozens of mobile platforms, each capable of assuming complete operational control within seconds. Destroying one accomplished nothing. Eliminating 10 changed nothing. Every loss had already been anticipated before the campaign began. The Dominion's offensive unraveled. Across the battlefield, more Union vessels crossed into Lyren space despite the Senate's original decision. They escorted refugees, delivered medical supplies, and reinforced the expanding humanitarian corridor. No civilization wished to admit it openly, yet each understood the same truth. If humanity had stood alone, the rest of the galaxy would have remembered its own silence forever. 3 days after the first quantum gate opened, the Krag Supreme Marshal issued the order no Dominion commander had spoken in centuries. Withdraw. The transmission spread through every remaining fleet. One by one, the invasion groups disengaged and retreated beyond Lyren territory, abandoning equipment they could no longer sustain. There was no pursuit. Admiral Turner refused every request to chase the fleeing enemy. Our mission was protection, he said quietly, not revenge. When the final Krag vessel crossed the system boundary, the firing stopped. Silence returned. Millions of Lyren were alive because strangers had refused to abandon them. Months later, the Senate formally acknowledged its failure. Its greatest resolution was no longer remembered for the vote it recorded, but for the promise that ignored it. With unanimous approval, the Union established a permanent humanitarian defense accord inspired by Earth's actions. Its official name was simple: the Never Alone Initiative. 10 years later, I returned to Lyren Prime. The scars of war had disappeared beneath thriving cities, restored forests, and crystal rivers that reflected peaceful skies. Children laughed in parks built where emergency shelters had once stood. Merchant vessels filled the orbital lanes instead of warships. It was difficult to believe this had once been a world awaiting extinction. At the center of the capital stood a simple monument. Not to a battle, not to a victory. Only 4 words carved into white stone. You are not alone. Representatives from every member civilization gathered for the inauguration of the Never Alone Initiative headquarters. Among them stood Admiral Turner, Ambassador Saren, and countless others whose lives had been forever changed by those desperate days. I remained near the back, content to watch. The initiative's first director, Ethan Brooks, stepped to the podium. He spoke quietly. We often believe history is changed by the largest fleets or the greatest victories. It is not. History changes when someone refuses to leave another civilization behind. His gaze swept across the silent crowd. True strength begins the moment someone says, "You are not alone," and then risks everything to make those words true. No applause followed. None was needed. Beyond the ceremony, children from dozens of worlds played together beneath the same sky, never knowing how close their future had come to disappearing. I looked toward the monument one last time. The promise I had spoken inside Helios Citadel no longer belonged to humanity. It belonged to the entire galaxy. And this time, no one would ever stand alone again.